Alright, in this video I'm going to be doing the rear brake pads and rotors on my 2013 Mazda 3. I got Brembo rotors and these OE Plus. None of this stuff was on sale. I just paid full price, so it was $245 plus tax. I called Mazda and they are asking about $650 plus tax. They were a little wishy-washy on it, but roughly $400 savings just on the rear end here. So I've already got the vehicle jacked up, axle stand in place, and the tire off. First thing I do is remove the caliper slide pins. So they have a little cap on each of the pins that's hiding the slide pins. So I'll remove the two caps, and then I'm going to take a 7mm Allen key. I have one that goes on a ratchet. Just a regular Allen key would work as well though, or a hex, and just loosen off the slide pins. They are a little long, so you got to keep ratcheting away until you get the entire slide pin off. I've done the front pads and rotors on this vehicle as well, and I'll put a link to the description. This was much easier than doing the fronts. One thing you need to do before you try and take them off like I did is just pull out that metal clip. I would recommend saving the metal clip. I actually end up reusing them because I find they just fit better. The other thing I found was you may need to poke the pins out a little bit with something like a flathead. Obviously be careful that you don't damage the threads, but that big chunk of rubber that they sit in actually sort of holds them in place so they don't just easily slide through. So you just got to give them a little poke so that they clear the caliper mounting bracket. Not a big deal, pretty easy. And then the brake caliper slides up and out of the way. Mine were a little bit tight because I put on the parking brake and then let it off. But once I wiggled it back and forth a little bit, it came off without too much difficulty. And I just put it up and out of the way. Obviously, you don't want it hanging on the cables. Now you can remove the pads. These pads aren't horrible, but they are heavily sort of angled, and that's because the rotors are kind of nasty. You can see the top and bottom are a little bit strange. They got a bit of a strange bevel to them. And just take note that the pad with the big metal clip actually goes on the inside. So I've been spraying this rotor down with PB Blaster. I finally went out and bought that after 700 people told me to do that online. So I'm giving it a go, and I'm using a dead blow mallet. So every once in a while I just give it a few smacks with the mallet. I've been doing that for a while, and eventually it actually comes off a lot easier than the front rotors did. So the bolts that hold the caliper mounting bracket are 14mm. Again, I hit those up with a whole bunch of PB Blaster as well, and you can see the condition that the rotors are in. When I got the brake pads done, it was like an out of province inspection thing, so they said I had to do the pads, but they didn't do the rotors. And that's why the rotors are jacked up and the pads still have quite a bit of thickness to them. So anyway, the pads weren't really running very well on the rotors. So those are the bolts, and here's the mounting bracket. I sprayed the mounting bracket a whole bunch of times with WD-40, hit it with some wire brush, and then spray it with some brake clean. I was pretty concerned I would have to really beat that rotor for a while, but it popped off no problem actually. But like I said, I hit it with some PB Blaster, hit it a bunch of times with the dead blow, and then once I got the mounting bracket off, I gave it one good smack and it came off. So not a big deal. Like I said, I was just using some WD-40, brake clean, and then either use a wire brush, or if I'm just doing some light work, I'll take my wife's toothbrush and I'll use that, and then obviously go put it back when I'm done so that she doesn't notice. But got it as clean as I can, and then hit it with the brake cleaner one last time, and the brake cleaner will get all the grease off and any of the WD-40 sort of oiliness, and then it also dries pretty fast as well. So before I put the rotor on, I do hit the rotor up with some brake cleaner on a cloth and just make sure that there's no factory oil or grease on it. It looks pretty good. Sometimes they're really dirty, sometimes they're not. This one was pretty good. And just like the front rotors, when I put those on, I really do put a lot of anti-seize on here. I don't know if it's necessary. I'm going to be honest, this might be the only time I do these rotors ever. With this vehicle at 260,000 kilometers, it's getting pretty long in the tooth, and those rotors went for 10 years. So if these ones last 10 years, I don't think this vehicle is going to be around anymore, but we'll see. I put the anti-seize on anyway, and we'll see what happens. And with the anti-seize on, I'm just going to put the rotor in place. I put on all the lug nuts, but that was just to keep track of them so I don't mix them up with my tools. You could just put on 1 or 2, and that'll keep the rotor from falling off when you're trying to do stuff with the mounting bracket. Like I said, 1 or 2 is enough. So I did clean up the mounting bracket off camera. I just sprayed it down with WD-40 and hit it with the wire brush, focusing on where the actual brake pads are going to contact the mounting bracket. I do use some Loctite on the mounting bracket bolts, and when I put these back in place, I use a 56 foot-pound torque spec on them. So I run them down by hand initially, and then eventually I'll break out the torque wrench and tighten them up to the 56 foot-pounds, like I said. So I only have this massive torque wrench that goes above 50 foot-pounds, so it's a bit of a pain when working on these small spaces, but it works. It's never failed me. But definitely you want to get these torqued to the right torque specs so your mounting bracket doesn't fall off on you. Now, to retract this thing, you need to turn it righty-tighty. So you got to turn it clockwise, and it very, very slowly retracts. I thought it almost retracts so slowly that you don't even notice it going in. But I cut this way short. I turned this thing about 500 times. Eventually it goes in far enough. It's weird, if you go the other way, it comes out very fast, but if you try and retract it, it takes absolutely forever. I don't know if that's normal or what. They do make a tool for it. I was just using needle nose pliers, so whatever you want to do, but it takes a while to retract that thing. I also have a big jug of silicone brake lube that I've been using for quite a while. I don't like the orange color. It looks way too much like rust. It works fine. So all I did here is put it on the contact surfaces for the brake pads. So that's where the brake pads are going to slide on the caliper mounting bracket. Just like how they came off, I'll put the one with that metal clip on the inside, and then the one without the metal clip on the outside. And I'm using the lubricant that came with the brake pad, and I'm just putting it in the spot where the brake caliper is going to come into contact with the pad. So on the outside of the pad, it's going to come in contact in 2 places, and then on the inside pad, it's just where the caliper piston is going to contact it, so it's going to be right dead center. And then I'll slide the caliper back in place. And I've already cleaned the pins up. I just wiped them down. I didn't use any sort of metal abrasive on them, just paper towel and some WD-40 and brake cleaner. Re-lubricated them, and then I'm going to put them in with the 7mm Allen key and torque them to 22 foot-pounds. That's 22 foot-pounds, so significantly less. One thing to note, when you're compressing your brake piston, you may end up with excess brake fluid back up in the reservoir, because obviously it's pushing in and it could push some of the brake fluid up. So it really depends on your level. You might want to go check that. I didn't find it had a major impact on the brake fluid level in my reservoir, so I didn't have to suck any of the brake fluid out or anything like that. So for these slide pins, like I said, each one goes to 22 foot-pounds is what I used. And again, definitely recommend going to the proper torque spec on everything and not just winging it. And then obviously I put on those plastic caps to protect the slide pins. I used the old brake hardware, that little metal spring. I found the new ones just didn't fit on very well at all. So I just kept using the old ones. Anyway, I throw the tire back on. I'm also doing the winter tires sort of concurrently to this job. So that's that on the passenger side. On the driver's side, same thing, just different angles if you want to see it from a different perspective, and everything's in double fast motion. Removed the 2 slide pins, removed the inner and outer brake pads. The bolts for the mounting bracket were a little bit more vicious on this side, so I'm using the 14mm wrench and then just giving a few smacks with the dead blow hammer to get it working. But eventually they came out no problem. I found retracting the brake caliper piston was easier without the brake rotor on, so I did it before I put everything back on. You can see I've already added the anti-seize before I put on the rotor. Again, sprayed the rotor and wiped it down, and then just put some lug nuts back on to hold the rotor in place. Once again, I'm going to use some Loctite to put the caliper mounting bracket back on. Obviously, I used a wire brush and some WD-40 and brake cleaner to clean up the mounting brackets as well as I could. I suppose if you really wanted to go at them, maybe an angle grinder and a wire wheel, or they make wire wheels for drills as well. Those probably would have done a better job, but good enough. And once again, the torque spec that I'm using for the brake caliper mounting brackets is 56 foot-pounds. And I'll put the brake lubricant onto the contact points on the brake caliper mounting bracket. Install the outer brake pad. I guess I forgot to mention I do give them a quick spray of brake cleaner as well. Not really sure that that's necessary. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Put on the inner brake pad, again with that metal clip on the inside. And then once again, I'm just using the lubricant that came with the brake pads, and I'll put it where the brake caliper is going to come into contact with those brake pads. Drop the caliper back on. Put the slide pins back on after I've sort of cleaned them up and lubricated them. Once again, that's a 7mm Allen key, and I'm going to torque those down to 22 foot-pounds, just like the other side. Overall, this job took a while. I would say maybe probably do it in 2.5, 3 hours. But if you're going to save $400, it's kind of worth it, I think. I don't get paid that much at work. And I'll finish off by putting on the brake hardware, just that retainer clip. And just like the other side, the new ones just didn't fit as good, so I just used the old ones. And that's it. Put the winter tires on and it's done. Anyway, pretty easy job. Overall, pretty fast. You can save lots of money doing it yourself. Thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.